key to diversity inclusion research is demographic data. Demographic data are really core to what we do and how we move forward. The attitudinal survey questions sometimes, that I've been discussing, sometimes perhaps don't feel direct enough. But actually, when you cut the data by different populations, we start to see difference, and that's where we can take action. It highlights gaps in the employee experience, and it identifies where change needs to happen. By combining different demographic data, we're able to explore things like intersectionality. If, for example, we want to increase representation among senior levels within our organization, we need to understand the different opinions of marginalized groups. For example, what do BAME women think about their career opportunities compared to their counterparts? Or whether diverse groups are more likely to experience bullying, harassment, discrimination, just like our UK data shows. We need to cut the data by different populations to get those trends. And that's why demographic data is really important. It's an activity that makes us feel nervous because we don't know what we're going to uncover. And if we uncover something, it's often quite difficult. We need to get used to feeling comfortable with feeling uncomfortable and acknowledge that we don't always get it right. We're concerned about saying the wrong thing or offending a particular group in the language that we use. It happens to myself, and I'll be really honest and talk openly about, 12, 18 months ago, I was less confident about discussing the topic of D&I with leadership teams that I work with and how I refer to people from different groups. It's been a personal journey of getting comfortable with, how I talk about perhaps responses from white employees versus non-white employees or people of different age groups. But it's part of the journey. It's a part of what we have to overcome to make a difference. So we need to be, not be afraid about speaking openly about these things, but also, show empathy and understanding in how we do that. My confidence in discussing these topics has come from doing this type of work, and that's about building resilience over time. We need to be open about listening to others and some difficult stories that we might have to hear. But there are things we need to avoid. A main one is circumnavigating the truth. The data is really powerful. If we run surveys and we have evidence, it's not just an assumption. It's not just a hypothesis. We've got some clear evidence which allows us to sort of, go straight into those challenges. It's very easy to become overburdened by negative sentiment, and it's quite an emotional thing we're doing. We're identifying difference in organizations where we're understanding that employee experiences from different from different marginalized groups are different, and they're not fair, and they're not equal, and they're not just. So we need to sort of be slightly resilient against some of that and get comfortable with it. And that means not forgetting the overarching ambition, which we're here to make positive change. So even if the results paint a negative picture, actually, it's a point on which we can move forward from. And one of my other top tips is, not avoiding becoming sympathetic, because that doesn't really get us anywhere. It's about being empathetic, really understanding those concerns, because that actually drives our motivation to want to do something about it and want to make change happen. When it comes to, how we can maximize the value of these surveys, we need to engage stakeholders and affinity groups. What is great about surveys is they're an entry point to open up conversations. If you grab an employee and say, tell me about your experience, they're going to be uncomfortable doing that. If you present something to them, if you show them data, show them results, it's a really good entry point to open up conversations. A bit like, again, the great case study from NSTAR. It helps us. It's important that we engage employees across these affinity groups at the start of the program, involve them in the design process, ask them about demographic questions, and also make sure they're included in the plan, that the stakeholder engagement is included in the plan, because what you don't want to do is come up with surprises towards the end of a process. And socialize the questionnaire with these affinity groups, get their buy-in, because we also want them to be champions for the process. But there's some key things that we often see are missed when it comes to stakeholder engagement. We often look at individual populations in silos. So we'll speak to our Black employees and say, okay, this is the survey we're doing, this is the data we've got. But we need to make sure our non-Black employees are part of those conversations, because if we don't, we create echo chambers or silos where people are talking in insular groups, and we're failing to meet that objective of being truly inclusive, where we need actually everybody to be integrated into the process. And one thing that we hear a lot of is affinity groups are often relied upon for coming up with solutions. So actually, we need to involve them in the process, but we need everyone to be involved in solutions, not just people from diverse backgrounds and groups.
But it was quite clear, be it a lot of the results and the insights that we had from the survey were really, really interesting. There were certain areas we really wanted to delve into a little bit deeper, just so we could understand the results. So this is where we started some further discussions with People Insight about what we could do. And we started to explore this option of focus groups, where we could pull groups of employees together, like small groups of people, and just ask them some specific questions around some of the results, just to really get some insight. What was really critical here was we wanted to make sure employees felt that they could be really open and honest. So we made the decision we wanted to keep this confidential. So we asked People Insight actually to reach out to our people directly and ask if they wanted to join the focus group. And People Insight facilitated that focus group. So we never knew who joined the focus group. And what we saw were the results in totality, but no one was ever named. And I think that gave our employees lots of confidence to actually be completely open and honest. And we got some huge amounts of insight from those focus groups.
I'll probably say in the first instance, it's about getting your processes right. So recruitment and promotional processes or learning opportunity processes to inject as much objectivity as possible and remove subjectivity. So creating that fairer playing field. So that could include things like blind sifting for applications, diverse panels, peer-to-peer reviews. I would also say one that I like and I see quite often now is to really expand on the way experiences are looked at when looking at different individuals who are looking to progress and develop. So not just thinking about career, but look for that cognitive diversity. So it's about challenging managers and leaders to really look beyond what they typically look for when they're looking for a particular role, and look at life experiences and different backgrounds and how that can be useful for a particular role. So I've seen that work really well in organisation. That seems to support certain groups in their development and also being promoted, etc. And I'll say lastly as well, it's about creating good networks across groups. So we probably all here have heard of mentoring or reverse mentoring to support D&I initiatives, and that works really well. But I think it's also about creating networks and mentoring pairs across all different groups in organisation. And I think the Food Standard Agency, speaking to someone there recently, they do it there, and they call it, I think they call it spectrum mentoring. So people across all different groups and spectrums pairing together and creating that open network, and that seems to open opportunities for people who often or didn't feel like they had that opportunity beforehand.
I think, and this probably goes without saying, you need to get the support from the top, actually. So, and certainly within NSTART, the support was there. There was, a real keen interest in D&I, and that is obviously really key. I think the other thing, and as I mentioned, certainly at the beginning, I did not see myself as a D&I expert, and sometimes it is just don't be frightened to take some action. And for me, actually, in some of the feedback we've had from employees, actually starting to see certain things happening, and they don't have to be huge changes necessarily, but even just the line of communication, running the survey, running those focus groups, was a hugely powerful thing for our employees. So I think they're sort of the couple of things I would take away. Obviously the commitment from the top, but also just don't be frightened to take some action. You know, it's hugely powerful.